Hello everyone, welcome to today's assembly. I'm Mrs Durrett and I'll be looking at what your narrative is. We dream in narrative. We daydream in narrative. We live in narrative. We hope, despair, create, plan, revise, criticise, gossip, learn in narrative. We are the story that we tell ourselves. Now, did you know at Yale University, there was a study done and they followed adults for 20 years to uncover the secrets to a long life. They found one revelation that could change everything. People who had a positive view of aging in midlife lived on average 7.6 years longer, so 7.5 years longer than those who had a negative view. So in other words, if you say, I think getting older is going to rock, you're likely to live between 7 and 8 years longer than your friend who says, I think getting older is going to suck. Hundreds of research studies prove the life-changing magic of a productive story. Are you going to get the grades you always wanted? The job of your dreams? Is my next year at school going to be successful? The single biggest predictor for all these events is not the fact of your situation, but the story you tell. Dr. Carol Dweck wrote, small shifts in mindset can trigger a cascade of changes so profound that they test the limits of what seems possible. Now, as a historian, I thought we'd take a historical look at this. Think of Winston Churchill, who at the height of the Blitz, when World War II was about to be lost, he, as Prime Minister at the time, urged Londoners to keep calm and carry on. 5 words, a simple narrative reset that changed the course of history. This is a picture of Steve Jobs, who told his narrative through in a number of ways, through books, through giving talks at universities, for example. Now, he told his narrative through 3 life-altering moments. He was given up for adoption on the grounds that he would then be given a college education. Now, he found that pressure really hard and almost too much to bear, and actually ended up dropping out. And he ended up sleeping on people's sofas, sofa surfing. He picked himself up, though, and pursued a dream. And he actually helped build Apple. Now, we all probably have an Apple product in our home, in our possession. I couldn't live without my iPhone. But actually, he ends up getting sacked from this job. So this is his second sort of narrative-altering moment. He gets sacked from this job, and he doesn't dwell on it. He then uses that to view what went right and what went wrong, to then he buys Pixar and he starts a new business and turns that company into something massively successful. Now, his third narrative telling story is when he discovered he had pancreatic cancer and that time was limited in his life. He said life is short and shouldn't be wasted living someone else's life. He went on to say, you need to make sense of everything that happens so that you can move forward. Don't waste time dwelling on the past, but use it to move forward in a positive way. So, my message to you is, as you near the end of your school year, what can you look back on and say, well, that was a success. Well, here are my strengths quite clearly. Well, that didn't go so well, and I haven't been so good at that. You'll embark on a new school year from September and get to reset your narrative. So I've got some pieces of advice for you. One is to stop consuming junk stories. People take in, on average, 14 newspapers worth of information every day, and the vast majority of it is rubbish. You hear the word fake news bandied around a lot, but a lot of what we read is junk. This epidemic of junk storytelling is often arguably killing our minds just as surely as junk food is destroying our bodies. The single best thing you can do to reset your narrative is simple. Don't take in too much junk. How can you tell if you've had a lot of junk in your storytelling diet? Junk stories are a kind of story that's designed primarily to rile up your emotions. It's the equivalent of eating lots of sugar and not having any protein. It's designed to trigger an emotional response. But just like a huge ice cream sundae or a big chocolate bar, there's no nutrition in it. And the sugar rush is addictive, destructive, and maybe dangerous. Junk stories tend to create junk thinking, and it's literally bad for our brains. Think back over your year and decide if gossip, fallings out over something someone said or that you heard, has that impacted on your own narrative in your school year? What could you change then next year? Now, I like this phrase, try to see the river, not the rocks. Now, my friend was learning to kayak and she kept on moaning all the time that she would constantly bang into the rocks. And she said, I'm hitting every rock in the river every time I go out in a kayak. And her husband actually said to her, well, stop looking at the rocks then. Because that's exactly what she was doing. She would go down the river, staring straight at the things she was essentially most afraid of and trying to avoid. Therefore, she was heading right for them. We tend to obsess over things we're afraid of, whether it's failure or a fight with a friend or best friend. The problem is, in life, as on a river, our boat goes where our eyes go. So when you read lots of stories and tell lots of stories about how bad things are likely to be, you literally make that bad thing more likely. But therein lies the secret to changing this pattern. See the river, not the rocks. Instead of obsessing over all the things that could go wrong or that went wrong, focus on all the things that could go right and that went right. Tell stories to your friends, your family, and in your own head about all the open river ahead of you. We have a natural tendency to look at the rocks, so change that narrative. Now, obviously, you have to accept and expect that setbacks may happen. The trick to achieving a positive year ahead is not to deny the setbacks, but to accept them and know that it will pass and know that it's something you could learn from. Don't tell yourself a story about how easy things are or how good they are. Tell yourself a story that says, this is all part of the plot. After all, every single success story in history or in literature or in business shares one quality. That moment when the hero needs to decide against all odds whether or not to keep going. And we will them on, don't we? So tell good stories about people around you. Think of the Pygmalion effect. Now this is this idea that you can create your own self-fulfilling prophecy. You can create your future. For better and for worse. Now the stories we tell about people tend to become true. The gossip that might be shared could often become true. When teachers are cued to think good things about their students, those students do better, even if the teachers don't say what they're thinking out loud. When people are told, you're the kind of person who performs well under pressure, before doing a high-stress task, their performance goes up by 33%. So stories change brains and behaviours. The lesson here is this. Practice telling good stories, even just in your own head, about your friends, about your teachers, about your family. You'll find that when you change the story you're telling about them, they will change too. Possibly my final thing to impart is this. Don't just plan. Do one thing. I bet this sounds familiar. You're overwhelmed with the size and the scope of a problem, and you figure if you can just write it all down, think it all through, you can handle it. But weirdly, the more you think about it, the more stressed you often become. And how often do you find yourself At the end of a really long day, feeling frustrated and thinking that nothing's changed. It can easily turn into a negative story spiral. So does your narrative of last year need changing? Look back, have a think, reflect. What one thing in particular could you do to change the narrative, to ensure that you go into next year successful and use all that has happened, good or bad, to help you grow and develop your narrative in a positive way? If it needs changing, change it for the better. Thank you.